Hello and good morning, everyone, on this beautiful Sunday morning, and that you're joining us for this masterclass, or I would rather call it little chat between between the very fun and very inspiring Nelly Ben Hayoun-Stépanian. Nelly, so good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia, and thank you so much for having me as a whole. Like, it's been so exciting to watch your movies. I'm sure there is some of the filmmakers here. Is there some of the filmmakers? Do we have any filmmakers? No way. There is no filmmakers? Okay, so you all want to become filmmakers. Or not at all. You're actually not interested at all in filmmaking, and you just happen to stumble upon this
They
class.
hate films, and we force them to come
You're
here.
like, you're all friends with Julia and Christophe. You family member?
Exactly.
But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you being here on a Sunday. I appreciate that it's like Sunday is always this kind of weird day where you're like, okay, what is gonna happen? It's actually my most depressing day. I don't know about you, Julia, but it's like it's a day where I just keep on thinking that the next day is Monday, and I'm like, no.
Most of my friends are like that. I love Sundays. I usually don't get dressed, so this is a very rare occasion to actually have
what
like
do you
real
do?
clothes on.
Okay, interesting, Julia. So you're on Sunday you just go naked.
No, in my pyjama all
You're in
day
your
long.
pajamas. Okay, interesting. I need to embrace that actually.
I think you should. We should have worn pajamas and make everyone else wear pajamas as well.
Today for you, I just put all of my glitter out. So this is.
Well, we can already, before we actually start talking about
Yes.
your work, make a little bit of promotion for your workshop.
Yes.
In case people haven't signed up yet and still want to join, because there's going to be even more bling involved.
Mega bling bling.
Yeah.
If you're aspiring to, act, or if you're interested in being a part of a movie, a feature film, then this is perhaps something that you want to kind of join. Or even if you're a filmmaker yourself and you're kind of like interested to look at alternative formats of filmmaking, then this is a workshop where we're going to experiment around 3 different scenes. And I'm not going to spoil completely the whole thing because I'm going to talk about it as well during our conversation. But you will be trying to reach and achieve world peace today in this workshop and try to figure out how to turn the International Space Station into a love hotel. So big plan for us today, this Sunday. We are on fire. Are we not on fire right now? Yes? Okay.
Everyone is awake now. Love it.
We all like
Well,
it.
you actually did build the perfect bridge to our actual conversation because our topic is radical imagination
Yes.
and film. And that is pretty much what you stand for in your work.
Big time.
So, well, maybe to give them a little bit of an overview why we do know each other, it's because I saw the world premiere of your documentary Doppelganger 3.
Yes.
Times 3 at South by Southwest. And I met the programmer who programmed it there, Jim Colmer, and he was like, you gotta meet Nelly. And then you were there with your doppelgangers handing out merch in front of the cinema.
Yeah.
And none of the people who had just seen your film wanted to leave. And they had so many questions. And they just wanted to stay talking to you and talking to you and talking to you. And I was like, we gotta bring this lady and her doppelgangers over to
No
the
lady, non-binary.
all of the
Person.
doppelgangers, that person, and all of the doppelgangers to the festival. And that's what we did in the summer.
Yeah.
And you also brought some merch, because
Yeah.
and I'm saying that because your films are always more than just a film. They are a happening, they are an installation, and you are always creating an entire world around that. So and now you're in the jury, and your 2 jury colleagues are right there. So maybe
Linda and
Anna,
Anna.
you wanna, and Linda, you wanna say hi. You're part of the jury as well. So you're already building a new family here of creatives. But take us back where it all started.
I think this is how we're going to do it, right? So we're going to share with you a bit of the experience of how it started, and then we will do some case studies as well, like of the previous films. And as you say, Julia, like how they all build as this kind of ecosystems with many different ways to actually like meet the audiences. Because also documentary filmmaking and independent filmmaking is hard. I mean, everything is hard, I would say. But I think one of the key cracks of it is like, how do you actually get to, you know, just bring people to the cinema? And so I kind of like experimented with a few ways of doing this. Oh, wow, there is a whole like dramaturgy to this situation. Anyway, so you mentioned it. I'm Nelly Ben Hayoun-Stépanian. I go by the she, they pronouns, which mean that I'm non-binary and gender fluid as well. I mean, you know, I changed quite a bit. I mean, you probably have seen like 6 different versions of myself so far, and we only met like, what, a year ago, 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
And I must say, I'm sorry again for my French accent. I was raised in France, and therefore this is unfortunately a part of my ear. And so, you know, hopefully I make sense. Do I actually make sense to you? Because this accent is horrifying. Like every time I hear French people speak in English, I just want to like stick my head and put it through the wall. But
I saw a lot of nodding. Nodding is
okay,
good.
you're fine. We move to the next one. Presentation completely chaotic. Just be prepared. It's going to go all over you. About 145 slides, you know, when you ask me to present this thing. And then here you go, like family member. We're going to start here because I think it's quite important. Until very recently, I didn't see this as being relevant at all to my practice. And then, you know, every time people were telling me, like, you need to speak about your family and you need to kind of like embrace the fact. So my granddad is the person that got the Armenian genocide recognized in France, which is a big thing, because to actually get any genocide to be recognized, it does involve a lot of documentation and a lot of archiving and a lot of community building, right? Because you need to make a case and you need to then present it. You need to actually master the art of speech. You need to, you know, you need to have that kind of craft that comes with actually getting any form of recognition there. And you need to have a full understanding of how legal principles work and how institutions function. So in a way, I didn't think that that was relevant to the way I function, but it really does, because obviously I'm a documentary filmmaker. And, you know, this is my granddad and my great-grandma who actually survived the Armenian genocide. And then when they arrived in France and when he grew up, you know, they were all sharing one fridge. There was no fridge, you know. All of the Armenian people were put in one street in France. And in France, it's quite typical to actually how immigration functions. Like they just put all of the immigrants in one specific section so they can have the full control of that specific community, you know? And so the Armenians were all put in the south of France in this street called Rue Bouffier, where my granddad was raised. And he then got into politics quite early on, but then before he did that, these are the Armenians that survived the genocide. So you can see this is a full village that was left that survived. And then they traveled into Valence. And you can see maybe my granddad and my auntie maybe there. And then they kind of got together around the craft of textile. And again, I didn't realize, it sounds so obvious when I'm going to share with you the rest, but you know, I trained in textile design initially before I went into filmmaking. I mean, I actually never studied filmmaking, to be honest with you. But they all got together around the craft of textile because, you know, for most immigrants, when you arrive in a country, you kind of rally around one specific craft. And for Armenian people, carpet and carpet making was a big part of, you know, their heritage. And then they started to like organize like that. And so my granddad got together with his sister and the whole family and then all of the other like survivors of the genocide. And they started to actually like make this textile factory going. And they actually were really successful. And while they were really successful, they then had like, you know, they actually made quite a bit of cash, you know. And then my granddad then got invited, you know, it started to like more and more like, I would say, you know, like was more and more vocal inside the Armenian kind of like community. And then he became politician. So he was invited to be adjunct mayor, and then eventually found his way to the parliament to then pitch the Armenian genocide recognition. And so that's how he really started. And then on the other side of that, while I kind of tried to ignore all of it, even though I didn't, of course, you know, from a really early age, I was like marching in the street with the grandparents because that's kind of what you do. You know, and then the other side of that is like my dad is Algerian. And I don't know if you know, but, you know, France has been colonizing Algeria for 132 years. It's probably the longest run of like colonialism. Then they, you know, they committed torture. I mean, it's kind of completely messed up to the point where nobody speak about the torture that happened in Algeria. And so I had really two completely different experiences of life and sharing stories. From one side, complete silence, never talking about what happened and escaping Algeria and taking boats and stuff. And the other side was like really from an early age talking about the atrocity and the torture that happened during the genocide. Completely different approaches. So then I kind of like carried on, and then I then found myself doing jewelry making. So I actually was a big thing in Japan. So as it happens, I met someone, my partner at the time was in the online dating, first person to actually like get into online dating. Obviously we broke up at this point, but you know, we remained friends. And they basically went on online dating when it was a really early age of online dating. I'm 40, by the way. So beginning of online dating, they met this person in Japan called Lumi. And Lumi was the manager of a porn star in Tokyo. And Lumi arrived in the south of France. I'm from a little village, right? Like, I mean, a place like called Valence. And they arrived, like, Lumi arrived from Japan to meet my ex-partner at the time, and then invited me to come to Tokyo when I was like 17, 18, you know? And then the first thing I did is like get a ticket, turn up at her place, basically, which at the time I had no idea was the kind of the center of the Japanese mafia. Because, you know, like it was called Kabukicho, which is the hot area where all of the love hotels are. And so at age 18, don't ask where my parents were at this time, I just started to turn up there. And it turns out that was, what's her name? Michiko was the boss of my friend, was this porn star that became like a TV star, critic. Sorry, it's a bit of a long story. I hope that's okay. You're still with me, yeah? And you're probably wondering, why do I care about this? Yeah, why do you? I don't know. Every life is different anyway, but it's kind of insane, right? Like, I mean, I just turned up in Japan, found myself into this whole world of like, you know, love hotel, sex work, you know, and basically Shimako, she was called Shimako being on TV. So from a porn star becoming like a critic, becoming a TV star. And then I found myself designing her jewelry that she was wearing every day on NHK, which is the national TV thing. And then it became a big thing. So it became like, suddenly, like I started to have this jewelry line. And then at age 18, I started to make quite a bit of cash, actually. And I would go around Yakuza's home, like all of the mafia. And, you know, in the Yakuza culture, when you cut your finger, is because you did something pretty bad. And so I will go with my alginate and kind of mold whatever finger they had left and make them pendants. And it became an actual thing. And then from there, I started to live in Japan and started to learn about kimono making, and became a kimono master. And then it became a TV show. And then I was on TV. You know, I'm just gonna, I'm usually not sharing this stuff, but I think it's important. These were my designs at the time. And then I'm just going to show you quickly. This was a TV show that happened, you know, where basically, which was the most racist thing, actually. It was called Nelly and the Japanese. I mean, you know, like, just don't ask me, like, obviously, you know, like, so I was like here learning my, like, Japan. These were the three brothers that taught me how to make kimonos, basically.
Well, I'm assuming that's all what led you to space.
Well, you wish that. Then basically I was offered to stay in Japan.
Not yet.
Not yet. So I was offered to stay in Japan and run a kimono business. And then I was like, but I like to tell stories. And then I found myself again in textile, you know, like all my life I was in textile because, you know, my grandparents and so forth. So I was like, no. And then I applied for this school called the Royal College of Art. I just Googled best art school in the world, then found I was the Royal College of Art, and I thought, fuck it, I'm going to try it. Then, of course, I turned up and invited. I didn't speak any word in English. And then, by some sort of miracle, I got selected and got a full scholarship to study in London, which was mental. So then I turned up at the Royal College. And then I learned about this course called Speculative Design, which was a news course. And the whole principle of speculative design was to look at new technology and how they might impact our lives. And the big focus of this program was about how do you tell stories so that members of the public get involved into futures that they will, by definition, be involved with, but yet have no conscious of, like the impact of nanotechnology, synthetic biology on your lives. And a big part of the educative process was to work in teams, so like work with science fiction authors, work with people that come from all different backgrounds, and start to like rally a sort of, I would say like this kind of research hubs, and then make that tangible to members of the public. So, you know, some of my colleagues will think about how you might use your kids' poo to power energy in the next 5-10 years because we are running out of energy. I mean, these were all like completely dystopic scenarios. And at the time, there was no appetite for it, but then it became Black Mirror, right? So a lot of my classmates then started to write script for Black Mirror, you know, like the old TV series and things like that. So we found ourselves in this really niche thing that was just starting, and by some sort of miracle started to, you know, like, it's kind of like my life so far has been really being at the right place at the right time, you know? And then a curator from MoMA turned up at our final show and then selected all of the pieces, and we all started to become part of the archive of MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, and then all of us started to kind of, because it was only 15 of us, so then we started to have this kind of like amazing like launch pad into our practices as designers, not as filmmakers. Film kind of came later for me. And so I started to go, and I was always interested in the most extreme stuff, you know, like, so Large Hadron Collider, where you bombard proton at the speed of light. I always wanted to kind of figure a way where a member of the public can also have this kind of experience. This is a real experiment that takes place in Geneva, where you're reproducing the first cycle of the Big Bang. And so, you know, I was like, oh, what about you can make dark energy in your kitchen sink, you know? So I started to work with, like, what will happen, you know? Because all of these places are really exclusive, and by definition, I hate anything that looks exclusive. And so I kind of like started to work with these people. These are my drawings. Just you can see that I was quite obsessed by mini penises and pussies, like, you know, quite from an early age. I was very much in anal terror and all of this stuff, you know? Anyway, and then started to blow up volcanoes in my flat chairs and started to work more and more into like the thrill factor. How can I work within entertainment? And started to work for Disney to make like this extreme experience for, you know, member of the public to experience what it is like to, you know, be face to face with a volcano or be face to face with space or outer space. And then, of course, I started to look into space. And this is where space came in, because I realized that space is the most exclusive field, or at least it seems like it is, right? And there is a website called How Many People Are in Space Right Now.com, you know, where you can see it's pretty like bad, right? It's not many of us. And this is where I realized the importance of media, because in a way, sorry, Julia, I'm like doing you this. Are you still alive?
I love it. I'm very entertained.
Are you okay, though? Or is it really boring? You're okay. So
everyone's happy.
So space. So let's go back a second. So space. So I'm here thinking, how can I give a member of the public the experience of a rocket liftoff? And then, because I'm mental, I started to email every single astronaut that are alive. There is about 250 of them, so it's not a big job, but it was before the AI world, right? So you craft out of your email, you receive many, many no's, tons of rejection. And then finally, I started to think that the best approach wasn't email. To actually find an astronaut, you have to go to the Science Museum, find when they speak, and then hunt them down at the end of their presentation. So I found a willing astronaut to take part into an experiment that I was doing, which was about giving you the experience of a rocket liftoff from your living room. So this is called Soyuz Share, and it's kind of like, it gives you the full experience of a stage 1, 2, and 3 of the Soyuz rocket, which is a Russian rocket. And I work with this astronaut called Jean-Pierre Ignoret. with like a French astronaut that stayed the longest in the Mir space station, which was before the International Space Station. And so he helped me to give like the full, true, meaningful experience, the full bass, the full, the kick that you get when you move from stage 1 to stage 2 of the rocket liftoff and so forth. But then by doing through this experience of trying to find an astronaut, I realized that there is not so many of them. And I realized that it was so not fair, because if you're too small, too fat, you don't have the right PhD, what are your chances to actually experience, weightlessness and so forth? So this is where I started to be confronted with this idea. And then I started to realize that space is actually my best way into Earth governance. If you're interested into politics, if you're interested into modifying the way that power structures are, then you're going to have to actually start looking at space, because actually all of the most atrophic and horrific things that happen on these planets have to do with outer space. The reason why we have wars, the reason why we have genocide is because we have Earth observation, because we have satellites in every single time of the day scooping around the universe and surveying our territories and allowing and giving data to nation states on the ground. So of course, nation states that can afford to have access to this data can then move their army from one place to the other of the place. And if you cut off access to Earth observation, then by definition, nobody can actually fight with the time of just fighting with your gun and your things is over. Just in case you didn't know, everything is happening with drones. Everything is happening through Earth observation. So then this is where it started to become really interesting to me. It's like, if you are big about demilitarizing Earth and space, then you have to get into space. And then beyond that, I started to realize that for all this, every single indigenous people, and even people in Algeria, the Berber and so forth, in order to navigate and to guide yourself through the worlds, we use nightlife, we use the stars, people got out of the deserts by using actually the stars and the way that they are organized. And this, I will say, antique practice has been completely, for some reason in our contemporary time, being ignored from the way we have a relationship with outer space. We think it's exclusive, while actually space has always been really inclusive. That's the thing that we all have access to, nighttime. Every single night, I can actually connect with outer space just by looking at the stars. And media have made it this exclusive place. Media have made it the place of the 1%. Media have made it the kind of the vision of the 1%, the Elon Musk and the Jeff Bezos. Well, for me, it's actually a space for liberation. It's a space where you can start to reclaim transfeminism. You can start to reclaim queer movements through space and outer space. You can start to reclaim, and for a lot of science fiction authors, that's what it used to be. So this is where, my kind of big passion for outer space really started. And this is where I started to get it much more seriously and kind of made it, my kind of career path.
And maybe the next step that would be super interesting in your career is how did you make it into film?
Yes.
What was the first step? What made you decide, now I'm going to make my first film?
So then the first film kind of happened. So I'm going to jump straight into that. And then I'm sure I will come back to how do I survive and I make a living afterwards. So how did it start? So how did I got into documenting it? So I'm going to start with my first case study, actually. The first movie I did, which is called International Space Orchestra.
Maybe just a little bit of a break. It's you see here how Nelly's brain works. It's a lot of slides and a lot of different things at the same time, and a lot of different areas of expertise, actually. And that's how you function and how
you
create your
But
work.
then we will talk about that as well, but it's to fund a movie require money. And so one thing that I realized as well is there is two different ways you can do it. I mean, there is many different ways that you can do it. Some people, they go into film schools and they then work with producers, and their producer look for money. This is kind of the traditional director-producer kind of conversation. I, frankly speaking, never had that knowledge, which in a way has been a blessing, because it just meant that I kind of naively access these words and kind of make it my own recipe, right? So it meant that I had to actually navigate this world in a way where I was okay, I need money, And in order to get money, I need to get many different jobs. And so we will get into the many different jobs and how they fund each of the film. But really, in 2012, I was invited to do a residency in the US. This was my first time going in the USA, and I had no clue about it. About like how it works there. And I was invited in a residency in California, and that's important and that's relevant because in California, it's really fake it until you make it. And in 2012, we were really at the early days, early days of Google, Meta, Facebook. And as it happens, my residency was in Mountain View, which is the core of the Silicon Valley. And in the Silicon Valley, we have a famous NASA center called NASA Ames Research Center. And that's also relevant to the story because actually it would have never happened any other way than in this specific center, because all of the others are much more, I would say, by the rules and by the book. So what happened is I turned up uninvited in a way at NASA Ames Research Center one day, one morning, and I said, I'm the director of the International Space Orchestra, which didn't exist at the time. I'm just going to share with you the little trailer about the movie. I pretty much feel like if I'm an astronaut right now. The International Space Orchestra, it's a world first, right? It's never been done before. NASA Ames is such a massive place, 2,500 researchers. So it's as well bringing this whole event together, so then we call all meet and make something happen. Yes, it's going to be very enjoyable, but then also it's going to be quite hard work. So I just hope that you're all going to take part in this and like take it with the right attitude.
You remind me of a good con artist.
A good what?
Con artist. Someone who can sell anything to anybody.
Test tubes, go! Beaker, go! Ethanol spray, go! Capcom, we are go for powered descent.
We're here, we're on the moon, this is it. That should almost be, every word is just like a crystal coming through. The eagle has landed.
I'm kind of a perfectionist, and I'm a pretty high energy person.
You know, science is black and white, and music probably isn't, but it still takes a creative mind to do it.
When we go wherever we're gonna go, be it Mars or beyond, you have to take the human spirit with you or we won't survive or thrive where we're going.
I mean, they're never gonna be the Philharmonic, all right? But that's not the point.
But you get the idea. So that's the first film, and the first film is a documentation of how this project came about. But of course, it didn't just happen this way because there was no orchestra. And there was no orchestra. And then just to make it more fun, the whole film, like I have a Russian interface operator, and it's supposed to be the biggest like American moment that we are reenacting in the film, which is the moment where Eagle landed. So like the Apollo 11, mission. And so, of course, there was no Russian in mission control at the time, And so I kind of inserted this kind of little kind of like power, dynamic. And then it kind of get more and more chaotic as you kind of discover the movie. There is a baby, and so forth. What they didn't know at the time, at least at NASA, and that doesn't make it into the film, but it took me 7 years to actually make this project happen. And this is where my special techniques comes in. This is something for you in this masterclass. It's called the hammering technique. I kid you not. It's really is like the hammering technique is when a no is not a no until it becomes a yes. Obviously, I cannot say this now anymore because in the age of consent, like we're not gonna bring it into any, like just keep it within the work kind of dynamics, right? Like just being clear. But I at the time, like this is kind of like what I was, preaching for. The idea that people in a situation will always say no to you. And then my kind of like big task was to actually turn this no into a yes. And there was many ways that I could go about doing this, which for me was about like taking many different jobs. So I had a UN email address at the time. So that's why I started to get a lot of different jobs. So I started to work at the UN doing like VR stuff. Then I started to work at the SETI Institute, which is a Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, which is a research institution. Then I started to have an email there. And then basically, if people were to tell me no, I will go and email them with my other email. So you might say no to me through my Gmail, but you might say yes through my UN email or through my, And so I was starting like that. But then the other thing is like NASA scientists every single space agency are publicly funded. So that means that every single citizen of the US or anyone can email any of the scientists directly on their email box. So I started to email every single person in the agency and start to do a big research on the organization charts of NASA, like what are the power dynamics, who is in charge, who is making decision, how, why. And a big part of my thing was like, okay, I need to find someone who is going to tell me, yes, you can make this orchestra happen. And the reason why I wanted to do this orchestra is because I was interested to see how how NASA as a space agency function and what are the power dynamics to actually send anything in outer space. Because I was, I didn't understand fully the kind of the governance structures. So in order to understand it, I needed to figure out who is doing what, who is like, how do they, and I found that music was a really good way of actually getting the head of NASA together in the room with a young space operator that just started and actually get them to, have conversation that they wouldn't otherwise get through music. So, and it was simple. Like, we're going to make music together. It seems pretty safe, even though we're going to be talking about really quite like political stuff. And you're not, they're all militaries. All of the NASA scientists are, for most of them, coming from the US armies. And they're all funded by DARPA, which is a ministry of... I like to remind that to people because I think it's important to know that 99% of, any space and space mission are funded by Ministry of Defense across, for all nation states. So then all of these people told me no, and the reason every time I learn a new information, that's the hammering technique for you. So then I get to know, then I ask why, and then I learn information about how I can. So I'm not a musician, fine. I'm not a US citizen, okay, I understand. I have no budget. I never came to NASA Ames. I don't, which basically means they have no record of me as a citizen because I'm not a US citizen as well. I'm Armenian, Algerian, and French. You don't have access to like an army base. So then that kind of like was all of their reasoning. And I was like, okay, how do I overcome that? And so for each of those, I tried to find a solution. I'm not a musician, but I know people in music. I am not a US citizen, but I know US citizens that can actually escort me into the place. I don't have any budget. Well, I'm going to find budget. I've never been to NASA, that's fine because actually I'm going to meet people that know. So you can see how like slowly it became like, then what are you going to say to not give me access to your site? And then basically this is what happened. And then I did all of this stuff. We do the orchestra and then I come back and at the time I was recording everything. So I had like a Sony camera, like, with DV tape. And thank God I was recording all of this. And that's crazy, right? They let me inside the base with an escort. I had always someone following me everywhere because there is like secrets, like of course there is all of this new tech that they are developing as well, like, so you have always someone following you everywhere. But I was from sort of miracle, like allowed to go around with my microphone and my camera and just recording the whole process of doing this thing. I'm trying to find you a picture of the head of NASA because I think that's quite relevant. At the time, I think I've got it in another presentation, sorry. Like we're gonna move from one place to the other. There you go, where is he? Here you go, that's him. This is the head of NASA at the time. He's called Pete Worden, and I can tell you one thing. And they see this pass, like that green, red thing, it means that I'm not a US citizen, so people need to be careful to me. And you can see I have the microphone. Can you see that? I have my own microphone attached to myself. And I'm recording at all time. And I have someone holding the camera, or whoever scientist is with me is holding the DV tape. And so I was documenting all of this stuff. And then I come back, and then I made this orchestra at NASA. Bobby Womack turned up. Damon Albarn is here making music with us, like the whole like kind of situation. And nobody believed me because it's insane, My family doesn't even believe me. Do you know like how lonely this is? You spend 3 months doing this crazy stuff, and then you come back and nobody believes you. And so this is where I thought, okay, this has to become a film because I know I did this thing, And so, and it's not mad, so I needed to kind of like put it together, and then it became the first movie, the International Space Orchestra, and that's how it started for me. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what else we can say about this, but then, I mean, it's of course, it's mental. Then I can tell you about like the way the International Space Orchestra was designed in a way.
I think it would be super interesting because I mean it's a topic that you pick up over and over and over again, and it also leads to doppelganger
Yes.
times 3, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about the continuation of that topic that follows you around.
So a big part of my interest is always in counterculture. If you want to challenge power structures, you need to build a culture that is going to be a resistance or resisting within these very, rigid spaces. So in order for it to maintain itself, because change takes time, like the International Space Orchestra is still going on, like it's going to be like 13 years now. It had to become something like which is called a counterculture, and there is a lot of like sociologists that have been writing about counterculture, like Bourdieu, for example. And what they say is that in order to have a counterculture, you need to have a social capital, which is basically a community. And that's the situation with the International Space Orchestra. When you arrive, you're a new member of the International Space Orchestra. You get welcomed by the older member of the International Space Orchestra. And you get the jumpsuit, you get the outfit, you then get a patch, which is then your economic capital. You get actually something that is a sort of a currency. Like the younger member of the International Space Orchestra have got less patches on their jumpsuits than the new one. And this is quite similar to the way that the space mission function, like I didn't invent it. It's part of the space culture that, whenever you go as an astronaut, you have a mission patch, and that's, and every time so I just use what was already there to actually build this really strong spirit behind the International Space Orchestra. And then there is this cultural capital where you learn something. And so, of course, through music, you learn something. There is a reason why you want to be there, because you're going to learn with your colleague, you're going to learn how to play music, and that itself makes it that it's maintained, in the agency. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you have the numbers that goes with it, because one thing I realized quite early on as well is like the funding was coming. We were funded by NASA. Initially, we weren't. Then the movie happened. And then we became funded by NASA. We became an official education and outreach program funded by the US government, which then becomes something really dodgy. Because obviously, I'm not a US citizen. I don't have a visa to be in the US. And so we had this whole situation of like having like NASA official going to cash in checks for me so that we could actually like keep it rolling. And then it became bigger and bigger because I worked for a record label called Excel Recording that you might know, which is like FX Twigs, like Prodigy, Daft Punk, like all of them are, it's like, I'm based in London. And so I started to work a lot with them and make music videos and things like that. And so I started to work with so all of these artists that you can see are all part of their rosters. And so we started to do bigger and bigger stage. And by that point, like they couldn't say no. Like we performed with Beck at the Davis Symphony Hall. That was like 2,000 people. Then they performed Savages, which is like a punk rock band, at the Fillmore. Then they did the Hollywood Bowl, which is 17,500 people. This is Sigur Rós, and you can see like it's mental, like it gets big. This is the orchestra. And by that time, they couldn't stop it. But anyway, it was quite messy. Then Kid Cudi, and this was during the pandemic as well. I mean, do we want to listen to that? It's quite high. It's quite.
I think we should continue a little bit.
Yeah. But you can see, like, this is the orchestra, like, keep on going their life, and then just to make it more mad, it became the official band for the International Space Station. So every single astronaut that go in the International Space Station, the only music they have access to is the music of the International Space Orchestra, which is mental because they sound so, like, yeah.
Special?
Yes, very special, for sure. So then that's how we, like, maintain ourselves in this place. Okay. Done.
So, done. You're not done yet. Well, you know what? Because I mean, like, we only have like maybe 5 to 7 minutes left. What I would love to talk to you about is like, how do you combine the different sort of like fields you work in? Because I mean, we were trying to talk about your films, but it's hard to only talk about your films
Yeah.
because it's always more. Like, just making the film itself isn't happening. And then you're trying to take most of the films into the real world and to a live kind of space. And you do the same with your installations and with your art. And maybe we should be talking a little bit about one of your biggest exhibitions so far, or installations so far, that happened just a couple of months ago in London at Piccadilly Circus and at Leicester Square. And you had like huge blow up cats,
Yeah,
and
the
maybe we
Piccadilly.
can talk about the cats a little bit, because I think they give a little bit of an idea of like the dimensions that you're working on and the ideas of that you're trying to combine and put together.
Yes. I mean, I wonder. I mean, this is. I kind of. I also want to tell you about like putting film out there as well in the world. Because I think. What am I doing? Okay, quickly with the Piccadilly Circus. So this is Piccadilly Circus. Is the center of London. They have like Piccadilly Light, where you have these giant screens and stuff. And then, of course, it was for International Women's Day, and I was commissioned to be this, do an installation there. And so, of course, because, I know what that means to be in Piccadilly Circus, and I know what that means as well for any Armenian person or any Algerian person to be there, And so, for me, it was really important that I represent always. And then also that we have like, and it's always the things for my installation that I like them to have many different layers, but at the same time, if you completely miss them, that's fine as well. If you just turn up and you listen to music. So what it is like you have this kind of asteroids rocks, kind of like in the middle of the fontaine of Piccadilly Circus, and they broadcast these really weird noises, which I'm gonna share with you a bit of the sound that is kind of broadcasted. This is kind of sound that is being broadcasted, which is kind of weird sounding. Is a static. And what this is actually sound that has traveled to the moon and came back. I'm trying to find you another image of that. You think I have it somewhere. But this is sound that we have sent into the moon through one of these telescopes there. And the music has gone all the way to the moon. The moon absorbed the sound and sent it back on Earth, which of course is not an easy thing because you have to capture the sounds back. And it's called moon bounce, and it was used quite a bit in the 70s for spying, in a way. And the idea there was to actually like define a new way by which we, members of the public, can kind of like interact and collaborate with outer space. A big part of my mission is to decenter the human, or at least kind of understand space exploration outside of the human component. Of course, music is triggered by humans, but what I mean by that is we don't need to send human in outer space in order to do space exploration. And it's really important for me to actually start defining a new way by which we can DJ with the cosmos, for example, which is exactly what it is. So as a musician, you have to think about your music is going to go onto the moon. The music is then going to come back, and the sound that is going to be captured is going to be filled with a static of the entire universe. And the static is actually the sound of the Big Bang, the actual original sound of life as we know it. And so it's quite magical starting with, but also what you realize is like it's not really orthodox to the human ear. What we consider as melody here on Earth is completely different to what actually is at the layer of the cosmos. So that was kind of interesting to me to start with. And then what music do you go on and send? At a time where Trump and Zelensky were meeting, at that time that we were doing this installation, it's London, is the center of London, and there is a meaning, there is 3 different Ministry of Defense that need to give their approval in order for us to beam music, and signal into the moon and back. So we sent Pussy Riot, Rage, which is actually a music in which he burned the picture of Putin. And then we sent Massive Attack, a music that they did, basically a music where they did in collaboration with like a Palestinian right activist. And then we sent music of human heartbeats and mother's heartbeat into the moon. And then all of this wasn't being broadcasted. Of course, it's not like if I have given that piece of information to any, of the operator, because I knew that it would never happen otherwise, And then we then broadcasted it from the center of Piccadilly Circus. And that was like, for me, that was kind of like a really interesting kind of layer to the project, to actually like speak as well about politics, but then also about other ways that we can kind of like look at space as a place for love, compassion, and perhaps understanding at a place where, of course, we were in this really kind of intense tension. So yeah. But really quickly, I want to show you. So then you have the cats, which are the double-decker bus, and da-da-da-da-da. And I do this for a lot of brands as well. So whenever I get invited to work with a car manufacturer, I do a lot of stuff with cars. This is with Porsche, for example. Then, I did this project with them where I started to speak about the Armenian genocide through pattern and textile. So I use this platform to actually serve, allow me to kind of speak about topics that are usually not, part of the conversation in a way. So I just want to show you like another thing. Like, so for example, when we released I'm Not a Monster, which is my third movie, which is about totalitarianism regime, and I don't know if we can show. Shall I show the trailer?
I don't think we have time, but we can tell them where to find the trailer. On your
Yeah.
website?
Yes, website. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Because I think that's what we
workshops.
gotta do the workshop. Because what I love about you as well, that you do actually put a lot of your work on your website, so that we at least get an idea of how you create your worlds,
Totally.
where you create your words, who you create your worlds with. Because I mean, you're just trying to touch upon that a little bit, because you're very open to sort of like collaborate with the commercial world, with brands like,
I mean, money has to come from somewhere. And so, yes, so you're right in that. So it's like, I was just telling you about the record deal, which was an interesting one. I'm just going to like leave you with these two thoughts, and then we can take a question. So when we released the movie, of course I knew people would not turn up unless there is, so it's always about bridging different audiences. So like I will get like Daft Punk to make a new music. That music will only be with the film. So in order, like all of the fans will then come to the cinema to actually just listen to that track, for example. So then you build these audiences because it's so hard to get people to come to the cinema. So then that's why I started to look, I always work with music. And then I wanted to tell you something else, but then I forgot. It's kind of gone out of my mind.
Which is okay.
Yeah. Money. That's why I started Doppelgangers, because I realized as well, so I was a public speaker, and a big part of the way I was making finance is, of course, I work with brand, you mentioned, but then I also do public speaking. And so in the world of public speaking, an hour of your time is being billed £20,000, just putting it out there. So if you support like 3 different like charities, if you have like a lot of organized community that you develop through your work, which is a big part of like the way I function, then money has to come, like money has to arrive. And I realized that as a public speaker, I could never reach the same level than my colleagues unless I came up with an alternative economical model. And that's where my doppelgangers arrived. I realized that if I was to duplicate, then if you were to pay the big box, you get the real deal. But if you don't pay me the big box, then you get my doppelgangers, which of course is completely stupid, because the truth being that it's much more expensive for me to train people to speak like you do on stage than actually me delivering the speech, But it was kind of there to build this new economical value, within that whole like network where my male colleagues that will have the same kind of qualification, same years, will be paid much more than I was. And then by introducing this kind of new value system, then I started to reach like a new kind of bill basically within that world. And so that's how the doppelganger kind of became a thing. And then of course it became then a movie where I play around with that whole idea of like duplicating and triplicating. Okay, I'm gonna stop here.
It's kind of mean to ask for questions, because I think we could only take like 1 or 2. Are there questions? Because I would also suggest maybe we can take them outside and just, chat a little more. But if there's a really urgent question,
I think that's a really good question. Of course, like it's like once they understand like what you stand for, then like why do they still allow it to happen? But I think by the time it kind of like caught up with them. Like it's just now what can they do? It's its own thing. And so they have their own kind of credential within the whole cultural sector, like within the International Space Station, within the other space agency, who started to also open up their space, orchestras, like ESA is doing one too. So it's like by that time he's just caught up with them. And then there is this other part, which is kind of sneaky, which is basically, I learn, like I'm like AI before AI, in a way. I got, let me see if I have, I heard about something called the International Astronautical Federation, which is where all of the, I don't know where I put it, where all of the like decision in space and space are. And then I got elected in it. And then I became the vice chair of the Cultural Utilization of Outer Space Committee. And then I became the chair. And it's like, it's a lifetime, appointment. So they cannot remove me. Now I'm like a member of the International Astronautical Federation. I'm a member of the International American, Institute for Aeronautics. I'm a member of all of this organization. So if they fire me into one, no problem, because I'm actually like, I belong to all of the others. And like, as a matter of fact, at this point in time, we've launched the Palestinian Space Institute. And I got fired from the International Astronautical Federation because they thought that it wasn't right that the, Palestinian people were allowed to have their own space program, which of course makes a lot of sense, because for me, the way I function is like, everyone should have access to space, regardless of what. And they, like the Astronautical Federation is big about like diversity and inclusion and so forth. And I'm a member and the funding member of the inclusion, department there, which of course they wanted to be just really like tokenized, So, and just, within their own parameters. So when this came about, they got a backlash from like all of their members. And so that happened. But then what they didn't plan is then I created the same committee in the American Astronautical Society, who let me do that. And then basically now we just moved the entire ecosystem to another place and we still exist. You understand that's the way I function, because that's kind of, it will always happen that, like I always plan for the worst case scenario, basically. I'm always planning to be ejected. So in a way, that subversion is there, and always that you're playing with power structures. And a big part of my movie as well, and the way I interview people, is I always take it from the basis of when am I going to be thrown out of the door? And then I go backwards from there. So, if I interview you and we have an interview together, I'm going to push, in a way, to kind of like test out your taboos and test out your kind of limits. I get rolled up in carpets, for example, by, Nobel Prize of like politics or whatever. I get to that point until they realize that they've just done this really weird thing of rolling someone into a carpet on camera. And then at that point, they want to throw me out, and I know that. And then I leave the door. And it's the same thing with like power structures in a way. You kind of test it until the very limit, and then you kind of like then just get out of it before it gets too bad. And it's the same with like the Pussy Riot track, There is always ways that you can make it happen. Like, so Pussy Riot cannot be mentioned on the press release, for example. But, okay, we take it backwards from there, but we can still send the track, and we've sent the track. So it's about like how you play around these things.
how you bend the rules.
Basically.
And I think that's what we're going to do in the workshop as well, right?
Yes,
so
we're going to bend the rule big time. So Heart Snatcher is a new movie. Are we, like, is the people from the workshop here, or shall we?
Who's going to participate in the workshop? There are people
Yay!
from the workshop. So good. So give us a little bit of an insight so that we can kind of
Go
like smoothly transition into a
the
little
workshop.
bit of a break and then the workshop.
Yes. And I'm actually worried about like if there is people that were into the workshop that have not arrived to, or maybe they are
Most likely, yes, but we don't know. When is the workshop gonna start? Can someone help
now.
me out here?
I think.
Ah, good. 1
Yeah,
minute ago. We're already in the workshop.
Okay, we should probably move to the workshop now.
I have no idea.
Let's do that. Let's actually because
someone
yes,
here
3
who
minutes
knows
past
that?
the workshop. Let's go move to the workshop. You go take a break, and then
So we're gonna, because the workshop does not take place here, it takes place at
Elsewhere.
the studio number 1.
Yeah.
Will there be someone helping people to find studio number 1? Do we have time for a little bit of like a bathroom break and a drink and maybe a pretzel?
Yes.
That would be nice.
Yes, perfect. Let's do that.
So, okay, how about we all have a little tiny bit of a break and you're all welcome to join the workshop.
2
Thank
hours
you so
of
much.
fun. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.